it is so important. And I love the fact that their organization is doing that, where they come together every year. And I know recently it's been virtual, and they've been able to bring patients and researchers and doctors and pharmaceutical companies all to the table to talk about needs. And again, that is predominantly systemic JIA. And I wanted to make sure that you all know too, with our organization, with AI arthritis, our whole mission is to unite, to bring you a voice, to bring all of the people living with these diseases a voice as equals at the table, so that together we can solve problems that impact education, advocacy, and research. So in saying that, we also present those opportunities to you. And so some of you have signed up for our AI Arthritis Voices program, and that is how we do that. So I know we'll provide some more information about that at the end as well. But that is one way that if you're interested in coming to the table and answering these questions, you can, we really would love to hear from you. And again, if you're not comfortable saying it in the chat, if we provide these type of questions after the fact, we'd love to be able to hear from you, because we can give these to Sobi, we can give these to Avalo Therapeutics and all of the other pharmaceutical companies that are creating treatments. But first we have to know what has worked for you, and why do you think that is, and what hasn't worked for you, and what happened to make you realize that it wasn't working, and what do you think needs to be studied more in regards to Still's disease. So these are the types of questions that we need to be answering as people with lived experience, because that's going to help to direct the research as we go through. So Katie, thank you for mentioning this one, the way to sign up for AI Arthritis Voices. So let's move on to watch Rashmi again. This is, she talks a little bit about IL-18, which I will explain a little bit more in a minute what IL-18 is on a future slide. But one of the things that is going to be a focus here, and when you hear from Sobi and Avalo, is this term refractory. And what that really means is resistant to treatment. So if you hear somebody say, well, you're refractory, what's that? It means that maybe you've tried a lot of treatments and they're just not working for you. So Rashmi's child, who was diagnosed when they were 1 with systemic JIA, was considered refractory because they were not responding to the typical biologics that at least to be stable enough. So that's what this focus is, and why it's so important for people to be connected to the right treatment at the right time. So let me bring my video back here, and I need to go to 1407. Scroll up here, and let's watch Rashmi.
Samples that have been collected at all these conferences that we've organized, and other ways as well, is that a lot of the refractory patients actually have high IL-18 and sometimes elevated CXCL9 as well. And these refractory patients also tend to have MAS. And there's a bunch of drugs that are currently approved for SJIA, but these patients, even after trying those biologics and trying different immunosuppressants, the IL-18, etc., still can remain elevated. And this chart shows, this is brought from a paper by Dr. Scott Canna, and it shows how this IL-18 is elevated in SJIA anyway, but these particular patients that I'm talking about with a history of MAS, they can have chronic elevation of IL-18, etc. So it seems like these are good biomarkers, and you're going to hear further about this later on in the this session. Now coming back to the lung disease.
Okay, so I'm back, and this is something that as an organization, I mentioned if you were on in the beginning, I see we've had a few more join us, so welcome, and happy Still's Disease Awareness Day to those tuning in. One of the things that as an organization we do every year, we go to the American College of Rheumatology, which you'll see noted on the bottom of the screen. It says the ACR meeting. That would be the American College of Rheumatology meeting. And that's usually in November of every year. We also attend EULAR, which is the European Scientific Conference. And when I say scientific, this is what I mean. So when you look at the slide, sometimes not sometimes, it's not easy to read. So what we try to do as an organization is just what I'm doing now. And that is sort of helping navigate through the words, through the definitions. What exactly are we looking at here? And I know Rashmi did a really good job of explaining it as she was going as well. But the bottom line is, when I wanted to put a couple definitions out. So we like to call it, kind of definition time. And we also are happy to provide you with a list of these type of terms. We collect them every time we go to conferences and we define them. So our list is getting very long. But if you're interested in research and being able to look up these studies and learn more and maybe understand them a little bit deeper, because they are very complex, we like to give these glossaries because I think it kind of helps break it down a little bit. So when we talk about biomarkers, that is something that is measurable. When we're talking about research, and if you're in a clinical trial, or even if you're not, even if you're on a treatment right now, and we would call that post-market surveillance, where you might be monitored to see how well the treatment is working, and often that is your doctor, right? They're saying, how are you feeling? They're taking blood work. They're saying your markers are high, your markers seem under control, and you're like, but I still feel bad. So that's all kind of, part of seeing, is this treatment working? And one of the things that it really is we're moving forward to, as far as studying diseases like Still's disease, are biomarkers. Now, there currently is not a known 100% definitive biomarker that can say, if you have this biomarker, you probably have Still's disease. So it's not like that. And then some biomarkers, which could be genetics, like I'll use one, for example, like the rheumatoid factor, RF. You might see that on your blood work. Now, typically that is negative in persons with Still's. Does that mean you can't? No, of course you could be positive. But did you know that people walking around everywhere can be RF positive, and they don't have rheumatoid arthritis or any other disease? So just because a biomarker shows up, it is something we can measure, but it does not necessarily define how a person may feel, or even if they're positive for a disease in some cases. But the important thing is, if we have things we can measure, and then we can say, wow, this is really elevated in this subgroup of Still's disease patients, and it's not so much, or this medication controls it. So when we say IL, and we like to put the phonetic IL, it's short for interleukin. And again, big word. And essentially, think about it as part of your bloodstream, part of your body, where you have these proteins that essentially are responding to things. I mean, that's kind of the real layman's terms. So they mediate your inflammatory responses and your immune responses. So researchers try to identify those, and in the different families. So you might have heard like IL-6, and some of you are like, oh, what's an IL-6? That's what it's targeting something very specific. So in this case, Rashmi was showing about studies that are looking at IL-18. So it's one of these markers where they tend to be really high in people living with Still's. So the theory is, if we want to control that immune and inflammatory response, how would an IL-18 inhibitor, meaning stop, how would, if that could help? So that's one of the things that's been in study. So when you look back, this was 2016 that we're looking at this, and now there's the data, there's the background, there's the history that's telling our researchers, okay, now let's move forward. We have enough of a theory that this could work, so then they can get the license to start a different research in the different type of treatments. What I did also wanted to point out, when we talk about clinical trials, it's not always about treatments. It can be about different interventions, or just simply figuring out more information about a disease. So I found this by literally Googling IL-18 in trials, and this came up. And so I just wanted to show you, if you wanted to kind of go on your own and say, I'm kind of interested in learning more about this, I mean, Google could be a good tool for that. Just be, mindful of what you're pulling up. So you want to make sure it's credible information, and not maybe a republication on a website that may or may not be firsthand data. The problem with that, again, being is very scientific, but we're hoping that by doing things like this, we are able to help you navigate through that if you're interested. So one of the things that I saw here was just, and I kind of pulled out the main point, was that that again, this possible disease biomarker of IL-18 associated with people with Still's. Now, this is a study for adults, but again, we said in the beginning, Still's disease is now considered an umbrella. It is the same disease, whether it is it's just if it's 16 or over, it's onset in adult, and if it's under, it's considered SJIA, but the same disease. So knowing that for you is also important, because if you look at these and you say, wow, this would happen in adult onset, but I have SJIA. Well, guess what? Now research is starting to cross over, and if it's been in one group, then it's going to be looked at and translated because of the one disease. So it's so important for you all to realize. And just as a side note, I mentioned in the video you saw earlier, the snippet of me, and I talked about the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. They're the ones who, after clinical trials get to a certain phase, they review all of the information to see if it is truly safe and effective enough in order to warrant going to market. And one of the things that I know is happening in Europe with Still's disease in particular is the EMA is looking at this and saying, well, if this was approved for SJIA, then theoretically, now that it's considered one continuum, this medication could be used for adult onset as well. So again, opening up the therapies because of that. So that is, still is, I'll date it. We're here in 2021 for people who watch this, in the future. But I really wanted to just point that out, that there's a lot of reasons for being part of research, and it's not always about, if you hear clinical trial, it's not always about testing different drugs. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any other questions. So one of the things that I wanted to do is highlight this, that Rashmi had said. It's, instead of playing the whole video, a slide. And the reason I'm pulling this up is because of subtypes. So, we talked a little bit about biomarkers and what that means. But the other part about that is, as we're starting to define research and look into that individual, your individuals, your the way that you respond to treatments may or may not be the same as others. And if you're in like online groups, you've talked to other patients, you probably have heard this. You might think, wow, this works so great for me, but then somebody else says, oh, that didn't work for me at all. And that's because everybody still has some type of uniqueness. So a movement in all of our diseases and all of the autoinflammatory, autoimmune disease groups, there's a movement towards understanding what we say subgroups or subtypes. Because if right now, if in the current clinical trials, what happens is they try to get what they say is the general patient population. Well, shoot, that's hard when you have a disease that's so individualized. And then that's why current treatments, because the trials bring in what they consider that general patient population. So you could try to be in a trial, you may not be able to be in there because you don't meet the blood work, you don't meet, you have a comorbidity, and it excludes you. So it's a very finite group of people. So what happens is when the treatment goes to market, maybe only 60% or 40% are really having high success on that. So that's why when you talk to other people, some are great on it and some aren't. So the theory is that let's start focusing on these subgroups, and then by doing that, maybe you can have a treatment that works better for you, and the same with others. So the IL-18 is one of the first subsets to be identified, relating to these patients have this high marker, and theoretically, if we treat with that, will that help these patients? Again, the other aisles can maybe are helping other subgroups. So it's just trying to identify this. And you, as a person living with these diseases, we can definitely connect you with opportunities to be able to see, well, what kind of subgroup would I be in, and that type of thing, because that's what we do as an organization. So more than happy to get you involved. And again, I know Katie put the link in for our AI Arthritis Voices program.